The verdict. The Meridian Spire was not built for comfort. It was built for judgment. Commander Elena Reyes had walked its long glass corridors 100 times, and every time, the station reminded her of the same thing. 52 species had designed this place together, and not one of them had designed it to feel like home. The floors were pale, humming metal that reacted to every footstep. The ceilings arched high enough for the tallest delegates, the Threk, whose spines curved backward like drawn bows. 6 different air blends hissed through invisible membranes, so that no species ever had to breathe the air meant for another. Earth had a seat in the Thren Assembly. It had taken 11 years to win it. And every year since, humanity had learned the same hard lesson: a seat at the table was not the same as a voice at the table. Routine session, Ambassador Marcus Thorne said, more to himself than to her, as they walked toward the chamber doors. A decade on this station had aged him more than the years should have. His hair had gone fully gray, and the lines around his eyes hadn't come from squinting at Earth's sun. Corridor tariffs. Resource allocation. We'll be out by lunch. You always say that, Reyes said. I'm always almost right. The chamber doors opened without a sound, something that sighs should announce itself, and it still unsettled her, even after 4 years. The doors simply vanished into the walls, and the amphitheater beyond opened up like a held breath finally let go. 52 delegations. 52 different shapes, sounds, and ways of being alive, arranged in rings around a central dais. Above it hung the contribution index, a scoreboard of worth, glowing in slow-shifting numbers, visible to every species at all times whether they wanted to see it or not. Earth sat near the bottom. It always had. Trade volume, technology exchange, defense contribution, cultural recognition, by every metric on that board, humanity looked young, poor, and small. Reyes had stopped letting the number bother her years ago. But today, walking to Earth's seat, she felt it prickle at the back of her neck anyway, like an old grudge she hadn't known she was still carrying. They took their seats. The session opened exactly as Thorne predicted: dull, procedural, forgettable. A shipping dispute near the Ophir Belt. A refugee quota for a dying colony. Reyes let her mind drift to the reports waiting on her desk, to a message from Admiral Nair she hadn't answered yet. Then High Registrar Vel Oshin stood up. He wasn't on the agenda. The chamber's noise dropped the moment he rose, delegation by delegation, until the room fell as quiet as 52 species could manage. The Vashta Dominion never did anything without a reason, and Vel Oshin least of all. His people were tall, crystalline, faceted like cut stone, and they moved with the calm of a species that had never lost a war it chose to fight. Chair recognizes the Dominion, said the presiding officer, a formality Oshin didn't wait to hear before he began. I have prepared an assessment, he said, his voice gentle, almost kind, of the Earth delegation's fitness to remain in this assembly. Beside her, Thorne went completely still. Oshin raised a hand, and data bloomed across every terminal in the chamber at once. Someone had set this up in advance, days of preparation, maybe weeks. Charts. Rankings. Numbers dressed up to look like simple fact. Earth's trade contribution ranks 51st of 52 members, Oshin said. Technology exchange, last place. Defense contribution to the joint fleet against the ravaged expanse, 0, despite repeated requests. He let the silence stretch before continuing. And most recently, Earth's own survey division catalogued a system in neutral space, Kessa's Reach, and failed to report it within the mandated 90-day disclosure window. A direct violation of this compact's most basic principle, transparency. Reyes's stomach dropped. That data was classified. It had been classified 4 days ago. I do not say this to wound, Oshin went on, in that same soft, terrible voice. I say it because this assembly has spent 11 years extending patience to a species that has failed, by every measurable standard, to grow into the seat it holds. Humanity plays at diplomacy the way a child plays at a parent's desk, loud, eager, and blind to the stakes. I move that this assembly revoke Earth's trade corridor access, pending full review of its suitability for observer status. The silence that followed had weight. Reyes felt Thorne's hand tighten on the table beside her, not visibly, just a widening at the knuckle she'd learned to read after 4 years in rooms like this. "Motion seconded," said a voice from the Threk delegation, not from conviction, Reyes suspected, but from the particular fear of sitting too close to the Vashta Dominion with 3 open disputes still on the table. The vote came fast. Too fast for real deliberation. Delegation after delegation logged an abstention, not support, not opposition, just the quiet cowardice of species who didn't want the Dominion's next glare turned their way. When the count settled, the motion failed by the narrowest possible margin. Earth kept its corridors. Earth kept its seat. It didn't matter. The damage was already done, logged into the permanent record, witnessed by every species that mattered. Thorne rose to answer, his voice steady in a way that Reyes knew cost him everything. Registrar Oshin's assessment relies on selectively. The chair does not recognize further debate on a resolved motion, the presiding officer said. Somewhere in the upper tiers, Reyes heard something that might have been laughter, flattened by translation into the common tongue. Thorne sat back down. His jaw was tight. He said nothing else for the rest of the session. Reyes stopped watching Oshin. Instead she looked across the chamber, to the Corvai-Weave delegation, where Counselor Ithra Ven sat motionless among her clicking, iridescent kin. Ithra wasn't watching Oshin enjoy his victory. She was watching Reyes, one deliberate glance, held a second too long, and then gone, her compound eyes sliding back to the dais as if nothing had happened at all. Reyes didn't know what it meant. But after 4 years on the Spire, she'd learned one thing about the Corvai: nothing they did was an accident. The rest of the session passed in a fog. When it finally ended, Reyes and Thorne walked the long, amber-lit corridor back toward Earth's embassy in silence. Delegates from other species passed without a glance, the practice not looking of people who just watched something die and didn't want to be seen near the body. Then her comm unit lit up, buzzing hard against her wrist with a priority flag she hadn't seen used in 2 years. She stopped walking and opened it. The message was from Admiral Priya Nair, timestamped 6 hours earlier. 6 hours before the session had even begun. Elena, Kessa's Reach survey data just surfaced on Vashta military channels. Full resolution, full coordinates, our classification markers still attached. This wasn't a leak. Someone handed it to them. And it happened before we even walked into that chamber. Reyes read it once. Then again. Then a third time, the words rearranging into a shape she didn't want to see. Oshin hadn't exposed Earth's failure to report Kessa's Reach. He had engineered it. By dawn. They gathered in the embassy's secure room 20 minutes later. Reyes, Thorne, and Admiral Nair's projection flickering above the table, beamed in from the flotilla holding position beyond the Spire's outer beacon. "Walk me through it," Thorne said. The diplomat's comm was gone. What replaced it was harder, more useful. Kessa's Reach was a routine survey, Nair said. Uncharted system, neutral space, standard 90-day window. My team catalogued it 6 weeks ago. Nothing unusual, until the third pass. She pulled up a schematic, a slowly rotating star system, one orbital band marked in red. There's a stable vayrite deposit in the outer belt. Naturally formed. High purity. Large enough to matter. Reyes felt the shape of it click into place before Nair even finished. Vayrite was the rarest stabilizer compound in known space, the difference between a jump drive that lasted a decade and one that lasted a century. Every major power wanted more of it. Almost none of them had a reliable source. We held off reporting it, Nair went on, because we were still confirming the deposit was even accessible, before triggering a claim every predator species in the quadrant would immediately contest. We had 39 days left on the window. 39 legal days, Marcus. And somehow the Vashtu had our exact coordinates, our classification markers, 6 hours before Ashen stood up and called us liars, Thorne said. Someone handed it to them, Reyes said. Which means the humiliation in that chamber was never the goal. It was cover. Thorne looked at her. Discredit us in front of everyone, she said, thinking it through out loud. Make every delegation see us as reckless and untrustworthy, and while every eye in the galaxy is on us, the Dominion quietly moves on Kessa's reach. Neutral space, technically unclaimed, since our window hadn't lapsed yet. Nobody questions warships heading toward an abandoned system if nobody's watching Earth's credibility in the first place. Nair's face didn't change, which was how Reyes knew she'd reached the same conclusion already. I've kept a picket on that system since the 3rd survey pass. Standard caution, given what we found. 2 hours ago, 3 Vashta heavy cruisers entered the outer system, on an intercept vector for the Vayrite belt. The room went quiet. That's a compact violation, Thorne said slowly. Armed vessels in neutral space, with no assembly resolution. Which is exactly why they needed that vote to fail quietly, Reyes said. If they'd won outright, it's on record, they pushed for it right before their fleet moved, and everyone remembers. But a narrow loss dressed up as a fair hearing? That's just noise. Nobody connects 2 boring agenda items to a fleet burn 3 systems away. Not unless someone hands them the thread. Thorne stared at the schematic a long moment. Then we hand it to them. They'll call it retaliation, Reyes warned. A manufactured crisis to save face. Not if the evidence is airtight. He looked at her. Can you get it? Reyes thought of that glance across the chamber. Ithra Ven. 1 second too long. I might know someone, she said. The Corvi we've kept their quarters dim and warm, tuned to a spectrum that felt, to a human, like standing too close to a low fire. Ithra Ven received her alone, itself a message, since Corvi counselors rarely met anyone without at least 2 attendants present. You were expecting me, Reyes said. I was hoping I wouldn't have to be. Ithra's mandibles clicked once, the closest thing her species had to a sigh. The Dominion has grown careless in its confidence. They believe no one will move against them, because everyone fears them. My we've included. But you're not afraid enough to stay quiet. I am afraid exactly enough to be useful, and not quite enough to be a fool. Her black, faceted eyes held on Reyes, calculating rather than hostile. The Dominion has bled our border trade dry for 6 seasons under the excuse of tariff disputes. If they control Vayrite too, my people spend the next century as their servants. I'd rather spend something now. What do you want? Fleet intercept logs, Ithra said, without preamble. Our listening posts along the Dominion border caught the cruiser deployment orders 4 days ago, before your registrar ever opened his mouth in that chamber. Full timestamps. Full command signatures. Proof this was planned long before the session, not provoked by it. She paused. In return, I want a trade guarantee, preferential Vayrite access for the Corvi weave, formalized before this assembly, once Earth secures its claim. Not a favor. A contract. Reyes didn't flinch. This was the part of diplomacy nobody back home ever fully understood, even your allies charge you for the truth. I don't have the authority to promise that. Then find someone who does. You have until the emergency session convenes. I assume Ambassador Thorne intends to invoke Article 9. Reyes hadn't told her that. She filed it away. The Corvi clearly knew more about Earth's own procedures than most of Earth's junior staff, and didn't bother asking how. He will, she said. Send the logs. I'll get you your contract. Article 9 of the Thren Compact had been invoked exactly twice in the Assembly's recorded history, an emergency session, called outside the normal calendar, triggered by any member species holding proof of an active violation. No votes needed to convene it. Just evidence, presented in full, with zero delay permitted. Thorn filed the request at 0300 station time. By 0330, all 52 delegations had been pulled from their sleep cycles into a chamber lit at half power, groggy and irritated, more than a few openly hostile at being woken for what they assumed was Earth's petty theater. Velashan arrived last. His neck plates were a shade Reyes hadn't seen on him before, not the gold of performance, not the blue-green of satisfaction. Something tighter. Wary. Thorn stood at the center of the dais, and for the first time in the decade Reyes had known him, he didn't sound like a man asking for patience. He sounded like a man delivering a verdict. 6 hours ago, this assembly was shown data suggesting Earth violated this compact's disclosure rules, he said. That data was accurate. It was also stolen, handed to the Vashta Dominion 4 days before Registrar Ashen chose to make it public. I will now show you how. The terminals lit up again, this time with Corvi intercept logs laid beside Earth's own classification markers. Cruiser deployment orders. Command signatures. An unbroken chain from the moment the survey data was stolen to the moment 3 Vashta heavy cruisers entered neutral space, on course for an unclaimed Vayrite deposit, all of it dated before Ashen ever rose to call humanity unfit for its seat. This silence was different from before. Not the practiced silence of diplomats performing composure, the raw, unguarded silence of 52 species doing the same math at the same moment. The humiliation you watched 6 hours ago, Thorn said, was never about Earth's fitness for this assembly. It was cover, for an armed incursion into neutral territory, timed so no one would be watching the fleet while everyone watched us. Slander, Ashen said, rising, his composure cracking at the edges. A fabrication assembled after the fact too. The cruisers are still there, Registrar, Nair's voice cut in, live on the chamber feed, calm and flat. Position confirmed 4 minutes ago. Shall I show the assembly the current tactical plot, or would you rather withdraw them first? Ashen said nothing. And in this chamber, silence was its own confession. One by one, the delegations that had abstained 6 hours earlier began to speak, not in Earth's defense exactly, but in something colder and more useful, self-interest, realigning in real time. The Threk withdrew their support from any future Dominion motion. The Ophir Consortium demanded a formal investigation into Vashta conduct along 3 other disputed borders. Species that had quietly resented Dominion pressure for years found, in the space of 20 minutes, the courage that only comes from not being alone anymore. Cornered, Ashen made one last move. His neck plates flickered in a pattern Reyes had never seen documented. The cruisers will not withdraw. The deposit belongs to whoever secures it first. That is the law of unclaimed space, and no assembly vote changes what's already in motion. It's not unclaimed, Reyes said, stepping up beside Thorn, speaking for the first time. It's disputed. And Admiral Nair's flotilla has held position at Kessa's Reach since before your cruisers ever arrived. The tactical plot updated on every terminal. 3 Vashta heavy cruisers. For Earth vessels, smaller, older, outgunned on paper, holding a defensive line around the Vayrite belt, weapons dark, transponders broadcasting openly to every ship in the system. We're not asking for a fight, Reyes said, into the stunned quiet. We're asking this assembly to watch what's happening in that system right now, live, unedited, and decide for yourselves who came here to build something, and who came here to take it. Nair widened the feed, sending the standoff itself to every terminal in the chamber, then to every relay station in assembly space, an image no delegation could unsee, Vashta warships holding fire only because the entire galaxy was now watching them decide whether to become the aggressor on record. They did not fire. By the time Station Dawn cycled through the spire's lights, the vote was already underway. Within the hour, the Vashta Dominion's contribution index dropped to 0, not through combat, not through conquest, but through 51 other species remembering, all at once, that they'd never actually liked being afraid. Reyes found Thorn in the amber corridor afterward, watching the same crowds that had once walked past them without a glance now stop, nod, some even offering the small formal gestures of respect Earth had waited a decade to receive. You didn't have to give the Corvi a contract, Thorne said quietly. I gave them a fair one, Reyes said. That's different from a favor. Favors get forgotten. Contracts get honored. Ithra then passed them a moment later, flanked by her attendants, moving at the same unhurried pace she always used. But this time, for the first time in 4 years, she didn't look away. Her black, faceted eyes met Reyes's directly and held there, not quite warmth, but the beginning of something close to it. Then she was gone, folded back into the crowd, and Reyes stood in the corridor that had once felt like judgment and now, finally, felt like a place Earth belonged. They hadn't demanded the room. They had simply refused to leave it.